The idea behind PACE began in Berkeley, California, when a group of homeowners petitioned the city for underground utility lines. Here, the city paid upfront costs for these underground installations by selling municipal bonds, and it in turn recouped the costs by adding line item values, in other words, the amount owed for the projects, to the residents' property tax bills. This allowed the residents to repay the cost over a number of years. And so, one group thought, hey, why couldn't we do this with energy efficiency and renewable energy projects? So they did. It began as a pilot program in Berkeley, where citizens could finance solar and energy efficiency projects in the same way through assessments added to property tax bills. But it quickly became so successful that other state, county, and local governments began passing legislation to implement similar programs using this new financial tool, which is essentially adding a line item to property tax bills. Let's backtrack for one moment and discuss how PACE financing actually works. When a property owner buys property, he or she is responsible for submitting a property tax bill to the local government every year, in addition to paying the mortgage every month. Believe it or not, these property tax bills from both residential and commercial property owners serve as a leading source of revenue for your city. Are you a homeowner? Don't worry if you're not actively paying property tax bills. Most mortgage lenders are doing this for you. These property tax bills are usually collected only once or twice a year, but not always at the same time. So, your mortgage lender helps you by setting up an escrow account to pay the taxes in consistent monthly installments. There are a lot of ways that a city can secure financing for PACE, but all of these ways operate on the premise that the city has the ability to obtain financing for PACE projects because money for a project is eventually collected through property tax bills. The city can finance the projects directly, issue municipal bonds to investors, secure bank loans, or solicit third-party financial organizations. When the financial structure is decided, then the terms of repayment for a program are decided based on the evaluation criteria laid out by the city, which will vary from program to program. While each program differs based on varying local needs, most PACE programs work like this. The property owner is evaluated, which at the minimum ensures he or she is current on taxes, hasn't recently filed for bankruptcy, and has a certain amount of equity in the property. If approved, the participant can work with the government-approved third-party energy contractors, consultants, manufacturers, and engineers to decide on feasible projects and install them. The government works out a project payment amount, the contractual assessment, and the time span over which the project will be paid. If the property owner leaves, he or she sells the remaining project cost to the buyer, who will enjoy the energy savings that the project provides. But in order to do any of this, the state legislature has to propose and pass PACE-enabling legislation, which is usually just a short document that grants the city the authority to design and implement PACE programs if they want. The state can also require local state programs to include certain components in their programs, like specific participant evaluation standards, for example. Regardless, having PACE-enabling legislation at the state level does not mean that cities are required to implement the PACE programs. It just gives them the option to. Today, 32 states and DC have PACE-enabling legislation, which the map by PACE Nation shows. You can also see the states that are in early PACE program development, those that have launched programs, and those that have funded projects within PACE program regions. So, most residential PACE participants owe more than just long-term PACE project costs on their property. This might not be your first question, but we must ask, what happens in the event of default or foreclosure? Who would get paid first, the city for the PACE project or the mortgage lender? The answer all comes down to lien priority. If a debt has priority lien status or senior lien status or super lien status, it gets paid first. Legislation decides what debts take precedence. As a line item on a property tax bill, PACE assessments retain certain traits of property taxes. This puts them in line to be paid first if an owner defaults or the property forecloses, because the tax man always comes first. So for a residential PACE project in this particular situation, the city would get paid first for the PACE project before the mortgage lenders. If a property with a PACE project goes into foreclosure and the PACE project takes precedence over the mortgage, the city only gets paid for the smaller incremental payments upon which the owner defaulted, and not the entire project cost. For example, let's assume that a PACE project costs $15,000 in total and that the owner is responsible for paying $500 a year to pay it off. If he missed 3 payments and the property is foreclosing, the city would only get paid $1,500 before the mortgage lenders get paid, not $15,000. Remember, the next buyer that comes along is going to take on the payments for the rest of that $15,000 owed, because PACE costs are transferable. So even though these PACE lien amounts are typically small, the Federal Housing Finance Agency sees the PACE lien status as a problem. The FHFA is a conservator for 2 federal housing corporations, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. Fannie and Freddie basically buy and hold or package and sell 2/3 of the country's mortgages from smaller lenders. In 2010, the FHFA said that residential PACE programs weren't safe because it put lenders in jeopardy. So Fannie and Freddie wouldn't buy mortgages with PACE liens that were first in line to be paid, like we just discussed. But the FHFA went further by saying that even mortgages that originated in a jurisdiction with PACE programs would be subject to significant restrictions. So practically all residential PACE programs in the country ground to a halt, and with very few exceptions, that's where things have stayed on this front. So most states responded in 3 different ways. First, some filed unsuccessful lawsuits against the FHFA. Second, some changed legislation to make PACE liens subordinate to mortgage liens in the event of foreclosure. And third, others created reserve funds for mortgage lenders so that they might be compensated in the event of default. Even so, the FHFA has still not issued a different opinion, and to date, unfortunately, according to PACE Nation, the only flourishing state with residential PACE programs is California. There's been little talk about commercial PACE programs, which is largely because there's less controversy with them. In fact, 16 states have active commercial PACE programs today. Remember the PACE enabling legislation that a state needs to pass? Legislators can make and pass residential and commercial PACE bills separately. With commercial PACE lending, there's no FHFA, no Fannie, no Freddie, and the lending process is just different. Its success is due to lender property owner accountability, unlike in residential lending where few property owners even know who owns their mortgage. Commercial lenders usually know their property owner well. So if there are ever any payment issues, the lender knows where to find the owner. And second, lenders' investment value increases with a PACE project. In simple terms, this has to do with the PACE projects reducing operating costs and decreasing the property owner's debt. These are the 2 things the residential lending structure is currently lacking for the most part. But for these 2 reasons, commercial PACE programs are less contentious nationwide and therefore more prevalent and successful. Remember PACE enabling legislation that states have to have? Well, Tennessee still doesn't have it yet. Why don't we shift our discussion now to the South and talk about why? In 2015, with the help of the Tennessee chapter of the Sierra Club, 2 companion bills were introduced into the State House and Senate, proposing residential and commercial PACE programs together. This legislation was relatively standard, implying that PACE lanes take first priority status, an inherent trait of property taxes. Unfortunately, the bill was stalled early in the year, largely due to efforts from, you guessed it, the mortgage lending sector in Tennessee. Here represented primarily by an organization called the Tennessee Bankers Association. In 2016, the bill was reintroduced, but this time with consideration to the concerns voiced in the prior year, specifically from the mortgage lending sector. This new version specified differences between the residential and commercial PACE loans and knocked residential PACE liens from first priority to subordinate, which means mortgage lenders would be paid first in foreclosure. Not only that, but the authors also added a reserve fund clause, which would provide mortgage lenders with compensation if residential property owners defaulted. However, both residential and commercial liens would still run with the land, meaning project costs would still transfer from buyer to seller upon sale. Despite advocates' best efforts, the Tennessee Bankers Association was still the most vocal 2016 PACE opponent, even with the lien priority changed and the reserve fund added. According to the TBA, the issue is that the proposed residential PACE program still contain elements of priority lien status. The problem is that the total PACE project would still stick with the property upon foreclosure, even if they get paid first for whatever is owed to them. Since PACE sticks with the property, it complicates the regular foreclosure resale process, which they would be charged with handling. Also, the buyer might not necessarily perceive the PACE project as valuable, in which case these lenders might have to bear the cost of the difference. As you might have gathered, the residential PACE component of the Tennessee bill is currently facing a lot of external backlash, which explains why the 2015 and 2016 PACE bills have failed. And even if the residential PACE projects were passed, homeowners would have to pay off their project costs before moving, which kind of detracts from one of the main PACE benefits, transferability from home buyer to home seller. That wouldn't be allowed. This is exactly what's happening in California. Homeowners with Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac-backed mortgages can participate. That's not illegal. They just can't leave the project balance with the people they sell their houses to if they move. They have to pay it off in full. These homeowners can't even refinance without paying off the loan in its entirety. And right now, this is because the FHFA still isn't on board with PACE loans, even when laws say that mortgage lenders get paid first in foreclosure. And even in California's case, when there's a $10 million loan loss reserve fund to compensate lenders in the case of default. And as you know now, Fannie and Freddie, the 2 largest mortgage lenders in the country, won't be on board until the FHFA is. So even if Tennessee were to pass the 2016 PACE bill, more than half of homeowners wouldn't really be getting one of the main benefits that was meant to make PACE programs so attractive. Not until the FHFA finally deems residential PACE programs safe. Unfortunately, this hasn't happened anywhere in the country yet. If advocates want to offer homeowners a California-style PACE program, they will still have to either get past the Tennessee Bankers Association or get TBA on board. Either way, it's clear that this organization isn't going anywhere. It successfully blocked 2015 legislation and appears to be on track to block the 2016 legislation from passing too. Even after the authors made some major changes to the 2016 PACE bill in order to address TBA's concerns, specifically reducing the lien status and proposing a loan loss reserve fund, they still say they aren't happy with the PACE projects that can transfer from home buyer to home seller. Probably the biggest red flag is that TBA is saying that they are ideologically opposed to the government's involvement in banking. PACE only works on the premise that government secures its revenue through property taxes and that loans will be repaid through property tax bills. So the government essentially has to be involved in lending for PACE to work. So, the TBA is ideologically opposed to the foundation upon which PACE programs operate. Clearly, they either need to get out of the way or get on board with these residential PACE programs. Okay, so now we know that the FHFA's response has impacted the effectiveness and even the existence of residential PACE programs across the U.S. And we know that the TBA, and more generally Tennessee mortgage lenders, keep PACE-enabling legislation from even passing in Tennessee. They're worried about foreclosure scenarios, and this may seem unfair because there's evidence that suggests PACE projects from these environmentally friendly, energy-efficient projects can actually reduce mortgage delinquencies, and that reduces the chance of foreclosure. Regardless, this does not change the fact that the residential PACE programs do, in a way, subject mortgage lenders to undesirable impacts in the event of foreclosure. We can actually call this a negative externality, which, despite however small, is not necessarily fair. It's right to want to improve environmental and economic conditions in a socially responsible way, and research shows that PACE programs can provide these benefits. But we should not involve a sector that has no desire to participate in this transaction. Therefore, it's fair to argue that all programs, including residential PACE programs, need to demonstrate effectiveness and ethicality prior to implementation. If you really look at these past 2 years, with both the 2015 and 2016 PACE efforts in Tennessee, what you'll see is this: bankers versus nonprofits and volunteers. And there's a lot wrong with the scenario if advocates ever want any type of PACE program to pass. While there are a few nonprofits that appear to support PACE enactment in Tennessee, the Sierra Club is the only evident 501c4 nonprofit advocate that can sufficiently lobby, and even then, this organization is still a nonprofit with a limited amount of money for these purposes. On the other hand, you might have already guessed that the Tennessee Bankers Association, which is an amalgam of state banks, has plenty of cash that flows into lobbying and its political action committee. If so, you'd be right on the money. In fact, the mortgage lending sector is the second largest contributor to election campaigns in the state, as it so happens. And the TBA has a strong lobbying force. And when these lobbyists aren't lobbying, they're at BankPAC, TBA's political action committee, that ensures there's an ongoing influx of cash for such legislative efforts. Okay, so you probably get it by now. There are some major obstacles for residential PACE programs in Tennessee. Still, there are also some noticeable benefits, 4 in particular, that PACE programs can offer this great southern state. First, we have some direct benefits that are basically intended with PACE financing, like increased energy efficiency and energy conservation. Having PACE programs do achieve these things, and according to PACE Nation, existing PACE programs, 76% of which are commercial, actually prove it. From 2009 to present, PACE projects collectively improved energy efficiency by 46.2% and increased renewable energy use by 44.5% in participating buildings. Another major benefit is local job creation. Across the United States, residential PACE programs have created 14,000 jobs, and commercial PACE programs have created 2,700. I briefly referenced this in a previous slide, but governments offering PACE financing rely on third-party energy contractors, consultants, manufacturers, and engineers to provide services like project consultations, auditing, and installations. It only makes sense that these jobs are local. I wanted to note that this is a major selling point, but because PACE enabling legislation is pretty low-key and complex in Tennessee right now, it's likely some potential advocates, those standing to benefit in ways such as this, just don't know about it yet. Next, PACE projects help to improve environmental conditions. While there are few studies that discuss measurable environmental benefits of PACE programs, the logic that PACE projects will help improve environmental conditions is pretty straightforward. Energy efficiency and renewable energy projects reduce the need for power generation from non-renewable energy sources that are bad for the environment, like fossil fuels. Preventing additional fossil fuel power generation reduces the amount of greenhouse gases and pollution emitted into the environment. These emissions are responsible for undesirable climate change impacts, environmental degradation, and poor air quality. Because PACE projects can help to reduce greenhouse gas and pollutant emissions from power generation, they also help eliminate the negative impacts that come with it. So PACE projects can help to make our planet healthier for everyone. The last benefit might not be as directly linked as the others. However, it's just, if not more, important. PACE projects can assist in reducing mortgage delinquency and poverty. Studies show PACE projects can reduce the rate of mortgage delinquencies because monthly savings more closely align with the low monthly costs of the project. With that in mind, Scott Banbury of the Tennessee chapter of the Sierra Club indicates that authors of the 2016 PACE bill in Tennessee envision the creation of a regional auditing organization, which would, prior to the project installation, determine monthly savings so that financial obligations would not exceed the savings amount. Because utility bills absorb as much as 45% of a person's income in low-income neighborhoods like Memphis, these savings from simple PACE projects could make a noticeable difference in cases of extreme poverty. In these instances, PACE programs represent a way to significantly improve living conditions. For this capstone project, I was to design some feasible recommendations based on my position, which I would like to share with you now. If it hasn't been clear enough, I align with PACE advocates, so the recommendations I will discuss involve actions to pass PACE legislation. There's obviously more than one way to do this, but I think that these suggestions cover some pertinent areas that need to be addressed in order to pass PACE-enabling legislation in Tennessee. I believe that the TBA represents the largest immediate obstacle, and advocates can counteract many of its arguments and overcome the largest obstacles by dividing commercial and residential proposals into different PACE bills, and by developing a strong coalition, which can in turn strengthen the needed advocacy presence for the PACE bills. True, the TBA has more money, but aligning and organizing like-minded interests can prove just as powerful. Advocates need a central leading advocacy facilitator, for which the Tennessee chapter of the Sierra Club is fitted, that can channel conventional and unconventional advocates to ensure the strongest alliance possible. First, the Sierra Club should utilize resources already freely available. For example, PACE Now is a grassroots 501c3 that can assist PACE advocates to develop network-based support for legislative efforts and diffuse potential opposition. This organization has worked with advocates across the country and will prove a valuable ally. Researching success stories in other states will also help generate useful ideas. In my own research, I found that Arkansas Advanced Energy Association's testimony in successfully advocating and passing a commercial PACE bill was very relatable to Tennessee. There are also all sorts of free, useful documents online that were made specifically to help PACE advocates in this type of situation. From California, Sonoma County has published a replication guidance package for local governments, a 139-page booklet that provides guidance specific to efforts for PACE-enabling legislation and PACE program implementation. Next, the Sierra Club is going to have to start recruiting organizations to join the cause. While the Tennessee Chamber of Commerce and Industry might be an unlikely bedfellow for the Sierra Club, it also has the caliber of strength in the state legislative and regulatory arena on Capitol Hill. Specifically, it has a political action committee that helps establish meaningful relationships with valuable candidates and elected officials. There is an emerging pattern of local chambers of commerce across the country beginning to support PACE. In sufficient numbers, these members of TCCI and other members that might gain from PACE could together persuade TCCI to get on board. Also, the Tennessee Solar Energy Industries Association, the state chapter for the National Solar Energy Industries Association, is a 501c3 business association that represents the solar industry interest in Tennessee. There's a clear connection between this organization and the prospective PACE programs, both residential and commercial in Tennessee. And luckily, the nationwide organization, the broader Solar Energy Industries Association, has already recognized such benefits and expressed favor for existing PACE programs across the country. So it's fair to assume that the Tennessee branch supports PACE. There are also so many third-party contractors that could all benefit from PACE programs in Tennessee for the same reason: access to more customers and consequently increased profits. However, a lot of potential third-party contractors, for example those that install efficient heating and cooling systems, energy-efficient windows and doors, solar pool heating, low-flow toilets, weather-based irrigation control systems, air duct sealing, etc., they aren't so obvious. Because these 2015 and 2016 PACE bills in Tennessee haven't been high profile, it's entirely possible that many potential third-party contractors just don't know about PACE or the potential benefits they could stand to gain. The Sierra Club needs to work on identifying and contacting these small businesses to try to get them on board. After establishing these relationships, the Sierra Club should host a series of PACE conventions designed to review the most effective and efficient means to combine resources and lobby legislators, design the new PACE bills, and educate and mobilize the public. There is no question. There should be a commercial PACE bill and a residential PACE bill. The two should not be proposed together. Therefore, there should be a separate task force for both residential and commercial bills, where the commercial bill gets more resources and backing. This is because the residential PACE bill is less likely to pass, and therefore, if commercial programs are passed and implemented while the residential PACE bill task force is still working out the kinks, more benefits are realized. Therefore, the three conventions I'm about to discuss should be held disjointedly for the residential and commercial PACE bills, but I'm mostly going to discuss them together to keep it simple. So at the first convention for both bills, advocates should brainstorm on effective policy design, calling in local experts and stakeholders that might provide valuable insight. For example, tax assessors, bankers, and contractors can help to eliminate future complications. They should also analyze success stories across the country and try to integrate useful factors from other cases. For the second session, the objective for both bills should be policy design while taking into account testimonials and research compiled from the first session. The third session should be all about public outreach planning, one plan for the general public and the other for state legislators. It should be noted that time constraints and complexity are two of the main reasons that people haven't heard about PACE or don't completely understand it. Right now, that's a serious problem because there isn't enough advocacy, and that leaves only those with time and money, like the TVA, alone and unopposed to kill PACE bills. So these third sessions are extremely important.